I'm a Japanese guy who grew up in Japan only speaking Japanese. I'm fully educated in Japan and I've worked for Japanese companies. Let me try Duolingo. Get started. Japanese. Culture, of course, because I'm a man of culture. Intense. That's probably too easy for not just me, but many of you guys, so let me just try. Of course, complete checkpoint 1 to unlock these skills. It's a bit tedious. I wish you could just skip, because you already know your level.
Namae.
Namae. Easy peasy Japanesey.
Natsu.
What did he say?
Natsu.
That doesn't sound right. Natsu. It's natsu. Questionable pitch accent.
Ohayo.
I think Duolingo wants me to say Ohayo gozaimasu, but Ohayo is also correct. That's good.
Indo.
Okay, India. Warsaw. I mean, this is one of the first levels. Is this really a very important name of the city for beginners? Because even with native Japanese speakers, they might actually not be familiar with this city. I've been to Poland, but not many Japanese people have.
Warsaw.
I like how this person is very enthusiastic. Warszawa! Definitely not beginner level vocabulary. It's a very weird choice. So this kind of one word, one definition exercise doesn't make sense because with basic words, you tend to have many different definitions and depending on the situation, you might use them differently. So it only makes sense to learn them in context.
アメリカ人です。
I'm an American. Except I'm not.
アフリカ。
Africa.
切る。
To cut. Wait a minute. Kiru means to cut. To wear is kiru. These are two different words. And Duolingo is straight up wrong. This is what happens when teachers don't understand pitch accent. Dirty.
汚い。
This is for you, dirty-minded person. Wait, what did he say?
私。
He doesn't sound like a native speaker.
私。
This is a weird accent. Sweden.
スウェーデン。
She sounds very tired. Sweden. Sweden.
7。
I guess this is a number, but this could be somebody's name. This is what happens when you just give you one word without any context. Actually, let me try food 3. Tips. Always check the tips. In Japanese, when you ask someone if they are hungry, the expression is お腹が空きましたか? It literally translates to something like has your stomach been emptied? Well, Duolingo at least tries to explain something, but this is incomplete information. I think depending on the situation, the most neutral way of asking someone if they're hungry would be お腹空いてますか? First of all, I didn't use ga because in natural spoken Japanese, we often not use particles like ga. If I'm at work and if I want to ask my colleague if they're hungry, I would probably say お腹空いてますか? With お腹空きましたか? There's a process. You weren't hungry before, but now you're hungry because your stomach has emptied. So, お腹空きました. If you want to say you're hungry, you would probably say お腹空きました, which is a polite version of お腹空いた. Because with yourself, you know the time when you were not hungry, but now you're hungry, so お腹空いた. And if you want to be polite, お腹空きました. But with other people, you might actually not aware of the process. You see someone and you want to ask them if they're hungry. お腹空いてますか? Polite. お腹空いてる? Neutral. But if you have been with that person for a while, for example, you guys go to lunch and you do something afterwards, can be work, and now you want to ask them, お腹空きましたか? お腹空いた? It would be more natural. And then there's a question of what particle would you use? Because if I want to use a particle here, I would probably say お腹は空いてますか? instead of お腹が空いてますか? That would probably be the most natural way. お腹が空いてますか would also be correct Japanese. So when would I use that? For example, if I observe that somebody is hungry, like if your colleague says, oh, I want to eat something, then you can react to it by saying, お腹が空いてますか? I see that you are hungry. So we are actually very unlikely to say お腹が空きましたか in the context of this explanation. And if you go to a Japanese language school in Japan, your teacher might not explain this because they might have to just teach you the textbook and move on to the next lesson. They can't spend an entire hour explaining this. Because of that, textbooks and apps tend to simplify Japanese, which might be unnatural but understandable. So for the purpose of communication, it might actually not matter that much. But this is one of the reasons why people who learn Japanese often end up sounding unnatural. That's why I will teach you the kind of natural Japanese that real-life Japanese people actually speak. So click the link in the description and subscribe to my email group. It's usually not a very good idea to just memorize one translation for one phrase. Because we do say お腹すきましたか in some situations, but we also say お腹空いてますか in other situations. This is fine.
お腹が空きました。
お腹が空きました。
お腹が空きまし。
This is a very weird way of dividing a word. Mashi isn't even a complete word.
お箸を2本ください。
2 chopsticks, please. Interesting. So if you say 2 chopsticks in English, does it mean 2 pairs of chopsticks or just 1 pair of chopsticks? But the translation sounds a little too simple for the original phrase.
皿、出口、南、お箸。
お箸、お箸。Questionable pitch accent.
全然お肌がつきません。
Wait, what did he just say?
全然お肌がつきません。
Did you say ohada? It should be onaka. It's a non-word. Come on. I am not hungry at all. Is this translation good? It's a bit questionable. So the nuance of the original phrase, 全然お腹がすきません is like, it's been 6 hours since I ate my lunch, but I'm not hungry at all. What's going on? It's kind of like that, but the English version is quite neutral. It just says I'm not hungry at all, so doesn't translate the nuances.
お皿を1枚ください。
Weird accent.
お皿を1枚ください。
彼はお箸を使いません。
What? He doesn't sound like a native speaker.
彼はお箸を使いません。
Maybe he's not? Is it really necessary to have a non-native speaker who has a non-native accent if you are learning Japanese? I don't think so. You could at least learn from a native speaker. He does not use chopsticks. And this phrase is also pretty unnatural because if you're eating together and your friend doesn't know how to use chopsticks, I think in Japanese you would say something like, お箸使えないんだよ. Well, interesting because, okay, he sounds like a non-native speaker, not just in terms of pronunciation, but also the way he phrases things. Because here's the thing. In English, you say, I speak Japanese, I don't speak Japanese. In Japanese, we say, 日本語喋れます、日本語喋れません, which will be, I can speak Japanese, I can't speak Japanese, if you translate them directly. So in Japanese, we actually tend to use can or cannot. But in English, you tend to use just regular verbs, right? I speak Japanese, I don't speak Japanese, instead of I can't speak Japanese. By the way, this is the reason why many Japanese people say, "Can you speak Japanese?" when they're simply asking if you speak Japanese. And I wouldn't say a mistake per se, but this is one of the common and natural ways of speaking Japanese with non-native speakers. Again, if you're learning Japanese, is it really necessary to learn the unnatural way of speaking Japanese of non-native speakers? At least you could try learning natural Japanese. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. One plate, please. Interesting. So, would you actually ever say one plate, please in English in real life? And if you do, in what kind of situation? Because if you are eating and if you need an extra plate, you would probably just say, "Excuse me, can we have another plate?" or something like that. You probably wouldn't say, "Excuse me, one plate, please." Maybe if you're buying plates and they ask you how many plates you want, you'd say, "One plate, please." But still, I think you're more likely to say something like, "Just one, please."
お、皿、お、1、枚、ください。
Again, if you think about it, would you actually say, "お皿を1枚ください" in real life? If you need an extra plate, you would probably say, "お皿もう1枚もらえますか?" Something like that. I'm not hungry at all.
全然お腹
What did you just say, ohara? That's not even correct pronunciation. It's onaka.
が好きませ寿司
It's sushi, not sushi in standard Japanese. And they're teaching standard Japanese, so their pronunciation has to be standard pronunciation. これ
これはあなたのボールですか
Classic textbooks Japanese. This is the kind of Japanese that textbooks teach you, but we are very unlikely to say in real life. Like real life native Japanese speakers probably would never say this in real life. これはあなたのボールですか? Because most of the time we don't use あなた. Or some people do use あなた sometimes, but in a very limited situations. But we don't usually talk like this. This is very straight up textbooks Japanese. And some people argue that, textbooks Japanese are fine. It's for the purpose of learning grammar. But I would say, is it really necessary to learn unnatural Japanese when you can actually learn grammar with natural Japanese with no problems? I mean, if you have a choice learning grammar with natural Japanese or unnatural Japanese, I think most people would choose natural Japanese.
お、で、寿司を食べます。
Stereotype much? I love how this is a white guy who says, "I eat sushi with a fork." You can always learn how to use chopsticks. And sushi isn't even that rare in Western countries. A lot of white people already know how to use chopsticks.
グラスを2つください
The actual translation would be something like, "Please give me 2 glasses."
私の好物は寿司です
We probably never said this. Who wrote these sentences? Are they actual real-life Japanese people? Well, it's possible because many Japanese teachers have no problem writing unnatural sentences like this one. They probably don't ask themselves, do we actually talk like this? Like, if you want to say this in real life, you would probably say something like, 好きな食べ物は寿司です. Something like that. Maybe they just directly translated the English sentence into Japanese, and that's why we've got this unnatural Japanese.
あなたの好物は何ですか
This is super unnatural. Nobody would ever speak like this. Maybe it gets more natural if you go to a more advanced level. What do you guys think? Should I try? I think I should. Checkpoint 8. Oh, this is the final checkpoint. Let's do this.
大したことじゃないんです。
It's not a big deal. His ideas were nothing more than illusions. Yep. Unrealistic ideas.
彼の考えは幻想に過ぎなかった。
Given that this is more like a written piece, something that you would read in a book, it sounds fine. 彼の考えは幻想に過ぎなかった。Yeah. But it's a very bad idea to learn a language like this by translating everything into English. Because you can't translate everything, and even if you think you can, the nuances are often lost. In fact, the reason I can speak English like this is because I realized this and I stopped translating English into Japanese.
真実を述べることを誓います。
Is this wrong though? Now that you mention it, he didn't come to the party yesterday. そういえば、昨日彼はパーティーに。
来、中、
It's not right, it's ko.
た、
お肌ペコペコですか
Oh, interesting. お腹ペコペコですか is perfectly natural real life Japanese, but Duolingo doesn't like it. お腹がペコペコですか again doesn't even sound very natural to me because in a real life situation you would probably say either お腹ペコペコですか or お腹はペコペコですかお腹がペコペコですか is more like a reaction to somebody who looks very hungry. But if it's a general question, are you starving? It should be either お腹はペコペコですか or お腹ペコペコですか So Duolingo is very bad at teaching real life spoken Japanese. I feel very conflicted because before I started making this video, I thought maybe I could recommend Duolingo as a supplementary app if you are already learning Japanese. But after doing this, I'm not so sure. Like, as a Japanese person, it kind of hurts my Japanese brain, like looking at, especially listening to these sentences. There's no perfect resources, so I don't want to dismiss something just because it's not perfect. But there's a limit, and Duolingo, do I recommend Duolingo? Probably not, except I think it's fine to learn hiragana and katakana with Duolingo. This kind of just pure memorization is what apps are good at. If you already know a fair amount of Japanese and use Duolingo just for fun, I would say why not. But if you are a complete beginner and if you want to learn natural Japanese, definitely not Duolingo. However, if you're okay with sounding unnatural, it's really up to you what kind of Japanese you want to learn. But I also like learning languages, and I definitely prefer learning how native speakers speak naturally. That's why I will teach you the kind of Japanese that real-life Japanese people actually speak naturally. So click the link and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta.